So I'm here with David Gedge from The Wedding Present. Yeah, you can clap if you want, by all means. And you can bask in that adulation, that brief adulation. I think we all know. I'm doing this kind of for a reason. Got their start as a C86 band, the Next Smiths. They tied Elvis's record for the number of top 30 records in the UK. I got that right. And I wondered, where did you feel like you fit in the music scene? I'm going somewhere with this.
Oh, that's quite a question, isn't it? Where do I
You're
fit in the music scene?
Yeah. Then, like
then?
Yeah,
or
but in
now?
your origins, not now.
Oh, in the origins. Well, I think we were, I suppose, an alternative indie guitar band, really. We kind of started before the C86 scene.
Right.
But then that scene happened a year after we did. And we kind of, I suppose we were absorbed into it because it was a lot of like-minded kind of guitar bands and things. So, yeah, John Peel band, I suppose.
Yep. Okay. Well, I'm asking because you're touring Sea Monsters, 35th anniversary, right? And
you say 30th?
Huh?
Did you say 30th?
I think I said 35th.
Okay, just checking.
Whew, that was kind of ugly.
I was just going to correct you.
Okay. Shaken. So, and I'm asking because I didn't know The Wedding Present in '91, but I'd heard of The Wedding Present, and I remember seeing the review of Sea Monsters and CMJ, and it was like talking about yelling, and some dude who'd been in a band called Rape Man and Big Black, and I was like, this is not for me. But it's now one of my favorite records, like top 3 record for me. But I'm wondering, so clearly that review did not quite align with how I would have heard the music. But I'm wondering, given what you'd done to that point, how was Sea Monsters conceived by you? It's different in a lot of ways. How was it conceived by you, and then how do you think it was received at the time?
Well, funnily enough, I remember at the time, it didn't get very good reviews anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't know about over here, but certainly in the UK, critically and with the fans, people didn't like it because it was quite a departure from what we did before. And I think for us, it was just a case of we wanted to move on. We'd done the first LP, George Best, and then we did Bizarro, which was kind of like a better version of George Best, really. Come and sit down, this seat's at the front. And,
let's start again.
And we wanted to move on. And then by chance, we'd heard this record by the Pixies called Surfer Rosa, which kind of blew us away. We thought, wow, obviously the Pixies are a great band, great songs, but the sound of that record, we just all thought it was fascinating because it was kind of natural in that it's a band playing, live kind of in the studio, but also weird, like odd sounding. So, and then we were familiar with Steve Albini, in those bands, from those bands that you mentioned before, but I wasn't aware that he was an engineer, I don't think. But then we obviously found out that he was because he did that record, and then we convinced the label that we were on at the time that we wanted to work with him, and we did a couple of EPs in advance, to make sure that the relationship would be okay, and then we did Sea Monsters over here, yeah.
And you did that with RCA, which is like, you just weren't thinking at all about the context. Like, right? It seems like kind of, in retrospect, it seems like a crazy shift, and you weren't concerned, or you knew and didn't care,
Yeah, I think I'd say we're very lucky that RCA agreed to it, but then also we did sign because we spoke to a lot of major record labels after the release of the first album, because that was on our own label, and it was quite successful. So then I think we spoke to every single major record label, and they all kind of said, there's that kind of semi-patronizing, you've done okay so far, but with our finance and access to like big name producers and stuff and stylists and things like that, you'll kind of get bigger. And we never really, that wasn't our aim really, I suppose. And then RCA was the first label who said, look, carry on doing whatever you're doing, we'll sell the records. And we said, well, if you can put that in writing, that we would have total artistic and commercial control, fine. And they said, yeah. So then we said, well, actually, before that, our first release on RCA Records was a collection of Ukrainian folk music. So we'd already gone from this kind of up and coming indie band to like, oh, what, what are they releasing? So it was kind of unorthodox from the start, really. And then even doing the Hit Parade, later, that was kind of off the career path, if you like, because it's a bit weird. So it was just we had a good relationship with them.
So that live in studio sound, which I love. Someone was talking about it recently, and he said it was a he that he thought Sea Monster tells a single story, and I was like, I've always thought that too. I just hadn't articulated it to myself. I think it's because it feels like you're seeing it's like an opera or a musical being staged, and you're hearing the live staging of it start to finish. So is that is it a story? If it's not, have you thought of it? How do you conceive of it?
To be honest, no, I didn't think of it as a story. I think they were all kind of 10 songs written in the normal way that I do it, which is just basically trawling through my diaries and memories and listening to what people say, I guess, in relationships and things. But I can see why people say that, and when we play it live, actually, it feels like that as well. It feels like almost one piece of music,
Right.
in 10 kind of little chapters. And I think of all the albums that we've done over the years, that is the one that that kind of feels most applicable to, because it is it's got this kind of mood to it, really, which works. And but lyrically it didn't, there wasn't any grand scheme.
Well, so I want to talk about it live. I was going to ask when's the writing of it, because it does feel, to your point, it's I was going to say monochromatic, but has a negative connotation. But like, there's that sense of it. There's that sense of sustained, if not sustained intensity. The tenor of it is consistent. But you're saying that's what was going on, or that's sort of how.
Well, I think the Wedding Present have always been a live band, and when we first started, we had no money. Obviously, we had to be a live band in the studio because we had to be out there in 2 days to finish everything. So we used to play live, and then when we signed to RCA and we did Bizarro, suddenly we had this limitless budget, and we got these fancy studios, and we started doing it in that way of where you put the drums down first, and you add the bass, and then you add the other, and they can't do it in layers, and it took 6 weeks. And then we met Albini, and he said, why are you doing that? The Beatles recorded albums in a weekend, And we said, well, we're not the Beatles, but we take your point there, and so we went back, really, to the way we used to do it, and I think it works better for us, as a band anyway, and it's kind of the way I've always done it since.
Yeah. But musically, I'm thinking it's like sort of the most, well, no, because honestly, you could say the same thing about George Best and Bizarro, but I think it is so unified.
Well, I think George Best is more one-dimensional, because I think that we didn't really have any we didn't have any experience of trying to create any dynamics or texture. It was just kind of, here's all the songs, let's play them as fast as we can. And then Bizarro, we did kind of dip a toe into that pond of well, we're actually making a record here, let's make it varied and have changes in intensity and tempo and stuff. And then Sea Monsters was kind of the next step, I think. So we kind of messed around with dynamics, really. I think more that quiet, loud thing and everything and all that stuff.
Well, I meant lyrically, but anyhow, let's move on.
Lyrically. Lyrically, it's always been the same, really. It's always I've changed over the years, over the 40 years I've been doing it. So the way I write has changed because of that. But I've, apart from a few exceptions, it's always been the same kind of thing, which is just I analyze relationships and I feel a bit of a fraud, really, because I don't do anything original. All I do is listen to what people say to me, or what I read in books or see in films, or newspaper articles, and then I just kind of regurgitate it, if you like, in the form of a lyric. So yeah,
it's a happy accident.
Yeah, well, Yeah, I guess.
Okay. So I want to
just
talk.
a charlatan, really.
You heard it here first, folks. Um, let's talk about live because I was lucky enough to tour with you when you were doing Sea Monsters, and I had to check. I think it was 2012, maybe. I checked and I still forgot. But anyhow, so several years after the record came out, totally different lineup. And one of the best shows I've ever seen was the set in Chicago. But every night of that show was great. And that was, I knew that lineup pretty well from other shows and other tours. But I felt like all of those shows were elevated. And I credited Sea Monsters with that maybe. But I wonder how you feel because I felt, and this was with Charlie on the kit, and I think particularly of Charlie, as being an unusual performance for him night after night. But that's kind of what the record demands. So I'm curious as to how you have found it. You mentioned it wasn't well received initially, but obviously it's a classic now. So how have you sort of seen that evolve? Both I'll say from maybe from fan perspective, but also within the band and how the band performs, what it brings to the band.
Well, I think it's not any immediately accessible to a lot of people because it is quite a dark sounding record, and the vocals are quite quiet, and so I think it does repay continued listening, I suppose, more than other records. So it's not kind of it's more indie rock than indie pop, I suppose, is what I'm saying. So I think people came around to it eventually, and now it's seen as one of the best albums, but at the time it certainly wasn't. I think we just moved too quickly, probably. It's very different from Bizarro and George Best, and I think I always say it's like people, if they go and buy cornflakes, and then they go and buy another box of cornflakes, they want cornflakes. They don't want Weetabix, if you have that here. I don't know if you do, but some other tasting cereal. So I think it was a bit of a shock for people, really. But it's interesting because obviously I've done this Sea Monsters kind of concert probably like 3 or 4 times now over the years, and with different lineups, and it's obviously people want to play it in the same way as it sounds on the record, but obviously they've got their own styles and guitars and pedals and things, so it's never exactly the same. But I quite like that, really, because it's not the same every time. It's people add different things to it, which I find quite interesting, really.
Well, I guess in all fairness, I just said I thought that was great, but maybe I'm bringing that greatness to as a listener, right? I'm like, oh, my favorite record, and they're killing it. But I did feel like, again, knowing that lineup, it drew something different out of them by necessity, maybe by necessity of the material. But
I mean, it's a great record to play. Actually, it's it's quite interesting. There's a lot of interesting things in it. Which again, I'm not taking credit for because a lot of it just fell into place and by accident. But it's it's people like playing it, I think.
Yeah, and like hearing it. So you talked, where are you now? As you have these and you have other albums. I remember. So I will say and you all may know this. I got to play Bizarro. You toured Bizarro in the UK, and I was there, and I was surprised. It was almost like in the UK. It's like when I was in college. At the end of the night, the last song they'd play would be like "You Shook Me All Night Long in the Bar" by AC/DC, and everyone, it was, oh, we are done. And it was this exciting, visceral moment, and then you go home, right? And I felt like hearing Bizarro play in the UK, I felt like everybody in that audience was like, "This is my You Shook Me All Night Long" from when I was in college. And this is a really seminal album for me. So you have this legacy, and you have these records that are sort of signposts for people, and you continue to make great records, and you get to shake it up. How do you see at the beginning? You're like, where do I fit in now? Now I'm going to ask you, where do you fit in now? How is it? You have these tools at your disposal as you continue as your career unfolds. How do you sort of see yourself as a guy with this legacy and this ongoing? You're still creative. You're still a musician.
I mean, it's something I never think about, really. I just do what I do. It's I think I'm possibly slightly obsessed with it now. So you know, and what else would I do really? So yeah, and but you know, I think one of the overriding principles in the wedding present has always been that you know we like to move on. I didn't want to be one of those bands that made the same record every 2 years really, because I just think that that's pointless. You know, you've made that record, why make it again? Even though I think that is probably the way to greater commercial success because of what I said before. You know, people expect a certain sound, and so yeah, we've always tried to go off at tangents and we've had a lot of lineup changes over the years, and I think that's helped that in a way because people have come in with different ideas and different inspirations and different ways in which they think the band should move, and often I've been at odds with that, and then thought, well, actually, no, maybe it's good that I'm at odds with it because it takes us to a different area which I wouldn't have thought of myself. So, it's I do feel like I've been in about 6 bands to be honest, because there's a lot of different sounding records there, which is probably the reason why I'm not huge. But I think artistically, I'm kind of happy with with that legacy, I suppose.
Yeah, good. And you do have a legacy of all these different bandmates. How do you see that evolution, almost from their perspective? Like, as people move on, is there something? I don't remember this. I wrote an article years ago, and how the wedding present was like the best example of HR you've ever seen, because you kept getting the right people to keep moving it forward. What do you think continues to make it successful? How does sort of that evolution, with you as head of HR?
Well, like I say, I think I'm a workaholic really, so I'm prepared to make the effort, put in the effort, and yeah, I mean, as I say, some people come in and they stay for like 12 years, like Terry, that bass player was there for over a decade, and then some people come in and then they stay for a couple of years. So everybody's different. Some people enjoy the experience more than other people. It's hard to pinpoint it really, and yes, I've got to pick the right person to be in the band, but it's usually obvious because people get suggested to me who would fit in anyway. So I've really only got to like choose between 3 different people, So yeah, it seems to have kind of evolved, quite naturally, I suppose.
Yeah. We talked a little about legacy. Let's talk a little bit about all these books you've got over here. I want to point out that David has a catalog of songs and of books that are available.
Books and records these days. On the merchandise, like all these books, it's like a little library.
Yeah. But there's a lot to tell. Do you have anything you want to say about those? Like, what sort of this history
I'm old,
print?
basically. The longer you do this, there's more stuff to write about, I suppose. But basically, I mean, the one I'm most proud of is the autobiography, which is not on there, but it's over there, it's called Tales from the Wedding Present, and it's a graphic novel. And as a comic book fan, that was kind of a dream for me, really, because I don't make any money out of it, but it's such a great little hobby to have. So actually write down stories from.
That's the original version.
That's the original comic. Yeah, it was a comic at first, and then we started compiling them into these graphic novels now chronologically. And it's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite things to do, really. That I write these stories and then I send them away to the artist, and it comes back, and there I am in a comic. Which, as a kid, I would have, that would have made me more excited. Than actually being in a pop group, really. So
you're in a comic. I love it. Well, I'm going to open up to questions in a minute, but I want to say so. This is the 30th anniversary of us meeting, which I'm sure you remember. And when we met,
I meet a lot of people.
and when we met, I remember we had a great talk about a lot of things, and one of which was we talked about books for some reason. You said, "I think comics are the future of books."
Did I?
So yeah. So
I think I've just been.
No. You
cheeky.
You were sardonic and I was sarcastic, so we hit it off pretty well. And that you were, but it's funny because you're like my autobiography. I'm like, you were an autobiography, and then you're like, oh, you're a comic book.
Yeah.
but that's what you said. And the other thing that I'm going to tell a story. Just 2 more stories about you. One. So 2 things about David Gedge. Last year we saw each other for the first time after several years, and the first thing you said to me was, "You put on weight." And the other
Well, I've
story,
just been observing.
that's why you're such a great lyricist, right? That you observe it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the other thing, the other story then is, again, 30 years ago, we had this conversation. And one of the things we figured out, we both really like Roger Moore. And David, as I said, you're very sardonic. He says, you know, that Roger Moore was on a show with Tony Curtis called The Persuaders. And I'm like, what? And, you know, I couldn't verify it wasn't true, but it didn't sound very likely. And I thought,
this is before the age of
right.
internet and yeah.
And like 8 years later, you sent me the box set of The Persuaders that you found at a thrift shop, which I thought was a lovely gesture. So he's an asshole and a wonderful guy.
Let's prove it.
And you proved it. So, all right. So with that reminiscence from me, people, y'all want to ask questions? Anybody have questions for David about anything? Right? Anything? Yeah. Jim?
So I totally love Sea Monsters. It's in my forever top 7, 5, 10, something like that. And when it first came out, I listened to it. Come home after work, band practice, whatever, listen to it with these headphones. And there's so many cool little buzzes and reverbs and stuff. And I feel like there's lots of records that sort of like the production, you know, carries the vibe. But I feel like the production and the arrangements, it'll get stripped back bare, but then your voice is kind of swimming behind stuff. And it feels like it reflects, to me, the emotion I get from it, which is like longing and frustration and things like that. And I'm wondering, did you think through things? I think of like Love Nest into like Corduroy, where you've got that crazy drum thing sounds like going and then the long buzz and you know, like did you try to match the arrangements and the production stuff with the emotion that was kind of you wanted to convey in each of the songs?
Well, I think it comes back to that, you know, the live stuff really, and I think, you know, there's, you know, little clicks and buzzes and, you know, odd things happening in the background. That's the kind of thing that gets removed when you've got, you know, too much money, you know, and you've got too much time in the studio, because you go, oh, I heard a little crackle there. Let's get rid of that, you know, and I think Albini was like, it's fine, forget that, let's move on, you know. Yeah, but it wasn't particular. I mean, that kind of segue from Love Nest into Corduroy was planned because we just thought it sounded. I think actually we found an amplifier in the studio, and we said, "Oh, Steve, can we try this?" And we turned it on, and it made, you know, this like hum, like crackly noise, and we just thought that sounds really, you know, even before anyone played it, it sounded great. So that was kind of it became the idea for, you know, we'll have that on all the time, and then as we finished playing Love Nest, it will flow into that kind of that background noise, and then we just messed around a little bit. But it was, I mean, I suppose it was improvised in a way, you know. It wasn't particularly structured.
I think that works really well.
Yeah, it's on, yeah.
The sort of follow up. So you talked about playing with these different lineups. The lineup last year was great. Sounded awesome.
Same this year, actually.
What's that?
It's the same lineup this year.
Yeah, Rachel. But
Chris.
Simon, the drummer on Sea Monsters, I think is great and like should be talked about a lot. But there's a lot of stuff on there that's like really hard to pull up, like on Love Nest and stuff. Like, did you like tap into these different players to, you know, to bring that stuff out differently in the different lineups?
No, I just think they kind of know what, you know, what's going to be entailed when they take the job on, really, and you know, they wouldn't put themselves forward, I don't think, if they couldn't, you know, if they thought they couldn't do it. So I've never had a problem where it's been something that, you know, somebody couldn't play ever. So I think it's been all right. My parts are the hardest. You know, it'd be hard to someone to play my parts, but the rest of it's easy.
Two things I'd follow up on that, Jim. Like I was saying earlier, when the tour we did with them, they did Sea Monsters, the drummer they had at the time, Charlie was very much a pro drummer. He's a teacher, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And not necessarily a rock guy. And it was notable to me. Like I was, you know, I knew how he'd been contributing to original music in the band and how he played other songs. Sea Monsters was the one where he had to totally turn up another gear, and it was notable that he stepped up to do it. And my band, we were all like, "Oh, Charlie's turning it on tonight." So it definitely was like pulling something out of him. And I'm thinking about,
well, I think he also improved as well, you know, because he was in the band, you know, 12 years as well, I think. Also.
Was it that
long? Yeah. And I think when he started, you know, well, I wouldn't say he was a bad drummer, but you know, I think all through those years of playing different, you know, 300 songs at the Wedding Present, you kind of learn different techniques and styles, and I think that kind of pushed them.
Yes. Okay.
Mm.
And then I was also thinking about working with Albini. And I remember when you were doing El Rey, and you sent me, and said you send tracks to lots of people, like within your circles. Like, what do you think? And you sent me a bunch of tracks, and you're like, should we record? I don't know if you only said with Albini or if you said who should we record. And I said, oh, you should record Steve Albini. And I heard there's all these songs on there amongst this group, and I was like, oh, this would be really great. But what went on the record was very different than. It was a fraction of those songs. I was like, ooh, maybe that wasn't. Maybe that I should have suggested. Obviously, El Rey is a good record, but like it was not what I was expecting to come out.
Okay.
So there, that synergy is.
Well, I always send it people to friends and that, just to see what people think. But then at the end of the day, it's when you're making a record, I think it's not always the most popular songs. I don't do like a spreadsheet and say, okay, well, this has got the most votes, because I think you've got to structure it. You've got to have a beginning and then it's like a set list. You've got to have a finale and an introduction, and it's got to flow and have different, light and shade and stuff. So often, and I think the wedding present, I've been guilty of this throughout our career. People always say, why is Crawl, a B-side? It should definitely be on the album. Yeah. And you think, well, yeah, I can see what you're saying, but it just didn't fit into the kind of the sequencing of the record. So, and I still do that now, really. So every album is it's not just the greatest hits of what we've got at the time. It's an album. It's different.
Yeah.
Rain isn't on Revolver.
Exactly. Yeah.
Stupid, but anyhow. Other questions? Walter. Is that you raising your hand? Yeah.
Yes. I have two comments and I have a question. First comment is, I remember when Sea Monsters came out, I don't remember it being a critical failure. I don't like. It was.
I didn't say failure.
It was an instant.
I just said that it was kind of not.
First heard Dalliance, the first explosion of that record, and we were just like blown away. I mean, Nirvana conquered the world, but we were still talking about Sea Monsters instead of that. Second comment is, I saw you in Madrid not long after Rachel joined your current lineup. She was amazing, but it was a seated venue.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
It was horrible. They'll never do that again.
To be honest with you,
it was torture.
I didn't realize it was going to be seated until
They
we
were
turned
so
up.
mean. Like if you got up and
it was a bit of a kind of a theatre, wasn't it? Really,
Yeah,
rather than a rock venue.
And then the question is, this is just a coincidence because Heavenly is coming here in just like 10 days after you're here, and Amelia Fletcher, I just talked to her, did an interview with her for my radio show, and Amelia Fletcher sang on George Best and some of the Bizarro. I don't know how much of Bizarro she was involved in. But I asked her about you, what it was like working with you, and I'm just wondering if you have any recollection of when Amelia came in. Like, how did you ask her? How did she get involved with those sessions?
Well, I was a big fan of her bands, really. To Lou Lagoche, and then she's been in about 6 different bands since. And I've always liked her writing and singing and style and stuff. So I suppose we're in the same kind of scene. So I just said, do you want to do some backing vocals? And the main thing that was interesting was, because I'm from the north of England, she's from the south, but she had to match my singing on the record. So for instance, like a word like after, I would say after, and she would say after. So she had to put on this fake northern English accent, so it didn't sound weird that I was saying after and she was saying after, because it obviously makes it longer. So that was quite funny. But I think it worked really well. Yeah. It was a nice mixture, because we got very different voices as well, which I think it's often the best way for backing vocals, because it's a different texture.
She described her singing as properly inadequate. Like, you had session musicians that were like too good. And
well, yeah, we've never had session musicians apart from
session singers. I mean,
in my other group, Cinerama. But so I never wanted that. I think we had one session backing vocalist once when we did the Hit Parade, actually, and it was because we worked with Jimmy Miller, the producer, for a while, and he had this person he wanted to use, and we ended up not using a lot of it because it sounded too, I mean, not good, but just kind of inappropriate. You know, it didn't fit in with what I wanted the wedding present to sound like. It was too polished or something, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, generally we kind of use proper musicians.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so with Sea Monsters, working with Albini, like how much of a role did he play musically as opposed to just sonically?
Virtually none, to be honest. You know, he never, he always, his kind of the way he worked was, the principle was the band is the boss, really, and whatever the band wants, he would provide it. And he, if you had a question, he would give his view on it, but he never ever ventured an opinion, because he never saw himself as a producer. He was, as far as he was more like we did a lot of sessions for John Peel on at the BBC, and I think he was more like that. The band would come in, and all he would do is record them, well, and you'd say, "Yeah, Steve, what do you think about this?" And you go, "Yeah, that's better. Well, that's better. Oh, that's worse." But yeah,
not try this rat pedal on your bass, man.
Absolutely not. No, you would never do that. No.
Well, contrast that with like Jimmy Miller, and who else did you work with on the Hit Parade? Like, but Jimmy Miller, like being such a classically known hands-on. Was that right? Or did you bring the shaker in?
Yeah, he did actually bring the shaker in. Yeah. It was really annoying actually, because we were listening to mixes, and he was shaking the shaker. And I was like, I'm trying to hear it. It's affecting the kind of balance on this. But yeah, no, I mean, who else did we work with? I can't remember now. It was Brian Paulson, actually. It was a friend of Steve Albini's, actually. Ian Brody, from the Lightning Seas, he did a few, and Chris Nagel, who did a lot of the Factory Records early stuff, the Joy Division thing. So it was an interesting year, because we did 4 sessions with 6 songs in each session with completely different producers and different studios. So that was interesting.
What'd you learn?
Pardon?
What did you learn?
I think the main thing I learned is we didn't really need a producer, because I think I've always had strong ideas of what the band should sound like, and so really the last thing I want is somebody coming on with their own version. And I think maybe again, maybe that is a slight problem in a way, because maybe I should listen to the people. But if I've written the song and I've arranged the song and I'm playing the song, I don't want somebody to come and say, "Well, you're doing that all wrong, and you should be doing this." So I think since the Hit Parade, we probably just used engineers, really.
Yeah.
But then engineers who know how to produce, I suppose. So if you do want some advice, we worked with Steve Fisk on 2 albums, and he's amazing at kind of keyboard sounds. He's a keyboard player, and he's got access to loads of like retro stuff. So I know nothing about that, but I just know what I like in terms of if you've got a great 60s kind of keyboard, and you go, "Well, I've got all these," and so that then it's nice to have that. But when it comes to the actual band, I don't think we need it, really.
No. But how about like with Cinerama, where you had these great arrangements, which, I mean, that's you, right? Or that's largely you. So you kind of got it, right? Eventually,
I think, yeah, because we did 3 albums, and I think it was a bit of a learning curve, because I've never done anything like that before, arranging orchestral, scores and things. But with the advent of accessible and cheap computer technology, it was a lot easier than it would have been like even 5 years before I started doing it.
But at the risk of sounding like I'm sucking up, you did a really good job, and so some great French horn parts. So my point being, I think you've probably proven that just from an arrangement perspective, you've got a pretty strong set of tools to play with.
The problem is, you kind of, I know what I think I want, and then you go into the studio, and I mean, there's a famous, well, not famous, there was an interesting one, because I wrote this part for 2 oboe parts, playing kind of at the same time, like a harmony, and the oboe player came in and said, "Oh, that's not going to work." And I was like, what do you mean? Because I had like a demo version with like oboe samples on it, as like a guidance. He's like, no, because the oboe, it's not a clear note. It's like a bagpipe. It's a reed. And it's like, oh, mate, just do it. And then he did it, and it sounded terrible. And I was like, oh yeah, no, I can see what you mean. So obviously I didn't have a clue. And when I'm doing the keyboard parts, writing these fancy piano parts, and I do it kind of because I can't play keyboard, so I was kind of dropping these notes in on the computer and copying and pasting and moving the notes in the sequencer. And I did write a couple of parts where the keyboard player said, I can't do that because I'd need 3 hands because you've written a part here and a part down here and then a part here, and there's so
It's called an overdub.
well, yeah, you could do it as an overdub.
Who's paying for the session?
Yeah.
Okay, but great stuff. I'm going to say, while we're talking about David's, if you haven't heard the Cinerama records, they are excellent with really great arrangements, I think, truly.
And Albini recorded
the second 2
of those,
the last 2, right?
Mm.
And you're a big John Barry fan, and I think that's really reflected well in those records. I'm also going to say David's like a shit hot guitar player, and at soundcheck he rips, but I don't know why you don't bring that to the stage.
What do you mean?
You play. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I outing you? I remember in Maxwell's we were at a sound check, and
I'm not a great guitar player.
You are.
Also,
No.
I think I'm a good rhythm guitar player.
You're a great rhythm player, but you there was a lot of hot licks. I've seen some.
No,
yes.
no.
Okay. All right. Never mind. Forget I said.
Yeah. Edit
true.
that bit out.
Any other questions on a safer topic than Dash? I've never seen you at a public event where you don't have a question. No?
I mean, Rachel.
Okay, all right. You can get your thoughts. Anybody? Okay, well, if there are no more questions, then
How is the tour going, and have you had any noticeable changes from prior years with our current issues
politically? Well, it's funny because everyone's, even last year, people were saying, well, it's an interesting time to be visiting the United States. And we were a bit worried, actually, because, you read these stories of people, even with, visas, which we've all got, valid work permits, getting turned away at immigration because they found a, defamatory comment about the administration on their Facebook. So I told everybody, before we come, let's delete anything that, that could kind of raise a, because those immigration officials, it's kind of what mood they're in, really. It's like, oh, okay, what you're here for. But no, it's all been fine, actually. And I think, at the end of the day, our fans are kind of, shall we say, a certain sympathy. They're not out and out like Trump supporters. I don't think usually. So it's been really good, and it's been nice with this lineup because 2 of them had never been to America before, so it's an interesting experience for them, and also it's nice for me to see it through their eyes. Seeing all the stuff I've seen, on countless tours. They're seeing it for the first time and marveling at the size of the portions in the diners and all that. It's all interesting.
How's Eric's weight?
Hey. Well, yeah, this interview is over.
And mine.
To follow up on that, I'm wondering, because to me, like the Wedding Present, and maybe up to Sea Monsters, are like such a quintessentially English band in like so many ways. John Peel and your voice and not hiding an accent, all that, and then you record with this like pig fucker music, Middle America producer, Albini in Minnesota, right? Minnesota, right? With this guy from Chicago, and then there's lots of other references. The song California, Take Fountain, like Insider LA kind of slang and stuff. What's your like relationship with America?
I think it's kind of a kind of love-hate relationship in a way. I've always been fascinated by American culture. 2 things I would say is, one is we are perceived as being a British band, but I don't think we ever have been really. I think we've always been influenced by music from North America and Europe, really, kind of equally, pop music and rock music, I'd say. So yeah, I think we're the Velvet Underground were a massive influence on certainly like early Wedding Present. And then I forgot what the other thing was. I was going to say.
Well, you lived in LA or in California for a while. How long?
Yeah. Well, kind of off and on a year or two, really.
That was it?
Mm.
Okay.
Maybe three years.
Felt longer.
Yeah.
Felt longer to me for some reason. Okay. Any other questions? Dash, nothing? It's okay. All right. I think, David, you're going to sell stuff and sign stuff and or not.
If people want to.
Yeah, okay. If you buy stuff, he'll sell it to you and sign it. Okay. Thank you. Thanks all for coming out. Cue soft jazz.
Yeah.